I grew up in a dress shop. My father owned a petite women's clothing store in Los Angeles, and I didn't just spend time there, I worked it. From the time I was 10 and making macrame belts to sell in the store, all the way through my early 20s when I was still in nursing school. I learned the day-to-day operations of running RS Petites. But my father taught me something so much more important than that. My dad taught me to treat every person who walked in with dignity and respect, no matter how they appeared, and never to make assumptions about who they were or what they could afford. I was really good at it, and I loved it. I loved making a sale. But it mattered to me to be honest with a woman, and making the sale was never going to be the bottom line for me. That's when I understood that sales wasn't going to be it. At least, not then. But here's what I actually learned in that store. There were two kinds of women in that dressing room. Some came out. They pushed the curtain back, stood in front of the three-way mirror, turned, looked, and said something out loud about what they saw. And some stayed behind the curtain. I used to check on those women. I'd peek in and ask them if they needed a different size or another color or a different garment, and if they wanted me to tell them how it looked. Some of them let me. Most of them handed the thing back over the door and said they were fine. I've thought about those women for 40 years. Now, fast forward. About 10 years ago, I was at my favorite store, Nordstrom, buying a swimsuit, and a young saleswoman looked at what I had in my hands and told me plainly that I was looking at the wrong styles. Not unkindly, just directly. She said the suits I'd been buying for decades weren't doing anything for the body I had now. I want to be precise about what she was telling me because it would be easy to hear it as an insult about aging. It wasn't. She wasn't telling me to cover up. She was telling me that I'd been shopping from an old picture of myself. And once I stopped, there was actually a lot more available to me than I'd been letting myself see. Welcome to Season 3 of Sexy in Your 60s. I'm Deborah Citron, registered nurse and National Board Certified Health and Wellbeing Coach. And this season is called Taking Up Space. Let me tell you what I don't mean, because the phrase gets used badly, and you may have already decided how you feel about it. I don't mean louder. I don't mean demanding more, or interrupting more, or elbowing your way to the front of something. I am not asking you to take up space at anyone else's expense. What I mean is closer to what happened in that dressing room. Taking up space is having enough room in your life, mentally, emotionally, physically, to try something on, to consider a version of yourself you haven't been yet, to pay attention to how it makes you feel rather than how it looks to everybody else, and to do all of that without having to know in advance whether it's going to work out. Trying something on is not committing to it. That's the whole point of a dressing room. Or, to say it another way, taking up space is showing up without qualifying for it. Now let's talk about why so many of us stopped. There's a guilt that shows up in women our age that I want to name precisely, because I don't think it's what people say it is. It isn't laziness, and it isn't selfishness, and it isn't some personal failure of discipline. If you built a life around being available, and most of us did, then time for yourself has to come out of somebody else's column. That isn't a feeling. It's a rule you were taught before you were old enough to question it. Every hour you spend on something that's only yours is an hour subtracted from someone who is used to having it. And you can feel that subtraction, even when nobody complains. So we get very good at wanting small things, things that don't cost anyone anything. There's a second piece, and this one is structural. Think about the roles you've held: mother, nurse, teacher, manager, doctor, business owner, parents' club president, the one who organized the holidays, the one who handled your parents' medical appointments. Those weren't just jobs. They were a feedback system. They came with a room full of people who told you constantly, in 100 small ways, and maybe a lot of other big ways too, that you were doing it right. And then those roles expire, or they transition, or they get handed off, or the people who needed you stop needing you in the same way. Here's the part nobody explains. Your competence didn't go anywhere. What went away was the confirmation. And in the absence of anyone telling you that you're doing this well, most of us read the silence as information about ourselves. That's the mistake. The silence isn't a verdict. It's an empty room where a system used to be. Which brings me to the thing I want to push back on hardest. When a woman in her 60s tries something new and feels shaky about it, somebody will hand her the phrase imposter syndrome. I don't think that's what this is. Imposter syndrome is feeling like a fraud when the evidence says you're not. But if you're genuinely new at something, you are not imagining the gap. You are a beginner. You actually don't know how to do the thing yet. The problem isn't that you're delusional about your competence. The problem is that our culture gave women almost no permission to be beginners after about the age of 30. So being new feels shameful instead of simply being early. Beginner is a stage. A syndrome is a condition. One of those you move through. I'm putting my nurse hat on now for a minute because I want to be clear that this is a health conversation and not a pep talk. And you know, I love the science. There's a well-known meta-analysis by Julianne Holt-Lunstad and colleagues that pooled 148 studies and more than 300,000 people. They found that people with stronger social relationships had a 50% greater likelihood of survival. And they concluded that the influence of social relationships on how long we live is comparable to well-established risk factors like smoking and greater than physical inactivity or obesity. There's a separate line of research on purpose out of Rush that found a higher sense of purpose in life associated with a substantially reduced risk of death from any cause. That work was done in adults quite a bit older than most of you listening, and both of these are observational studies, so they show association rather than proof. But the direction is consistent, and it has held up. Here's what it means for you. Staying engaged with your own life is not a luxury item. A woman who stops trying things on stops being met by the world, and the research suggests that has consequences in the body, not just the mood. I want to tell you why this isn't just theoretical for me. I've had 2 back surgeries and both hips replaced. During those stretches, I was not the nurse. I was not the one running the household, and I was not the person other people leaned on. I was the one being helped. I want you to understand how disorienting that is when your entire identity has been built on being the capable one. The surgeries went well, but there was no going back to the previous version of my body. I had to work out who I was going to be with the body I actually had. I gave up running. I gave up tennis. Those were real losses, and I'm not going to dress them up as blessings. And I'll tell you something else. Everyone I know is playing pickleball. and I'm not. Maybe I could. It's just a whole thing, and I don't have the drive for it right now. What I'd actually like to learn is golf, so I can spend some time with my mother while she's still out there playing. That is also taking up space. Choosing exactly what you want instead of the thing everybody says you want is exactly the muscle I'm talking about. Here's what I do instead. I walk, I hike, I do yoga and Pilates and strength training, and I stand up paddleboard, which, given my hips and my history with my back surgeries, is a thing nobody would have predicted from the list of what I gave up. You don't get to keep everything. The losses are real, but what's still available to you is almost always wider than the list you'd write from fear. One more story, and then I'll let you go. My mother took up golf in her 60s. She's in her mid-80s now, and she still plays most days. My father died 4 years ago, so she goes out without him, without a foursome, and often without a plan. She drives out in her cart, in her purple hair and outfit, and she plays as much of the course as she feels like playing. She doesn't finish. She doesn't care. She's not out there proving she can still play 9 holes. She's out there because it's hers. Now, the honest caveat. I'm not telling you that every woman needs to do this. I'm not telling you that you're doing this chapter wrong if you're content exactly as you are. This is yours to decide, and anybody who tells you there's a required version of aging well is selling you something. What I am telling you is that if some part of you has been waiting for permission, consider this me handing it to you. Over the next several episodes, you'll hear from women who did this. Some of them dramatically, most of them quietly. My job is not to instruct you. It's to put enough of these women in front of you that you recognize yourself in one of them. Here's the one thing I'd like you to do before the next episode. You can't try anything on until you know exactly where you're standing right now. That's what the 5-minute reality check for women 50 and above is. It's a live workshop I run once a month, about an hour, and it walks you through a 5-minute self-assessment and then what to do with what it tells you. You leave knowing where you actually are without anyone asking you to fix a thing. You'll find the next date and sign up at slanttoplants.com/reality check. So, go stand in front of the mirror. Push the curtain back. I'm Devorah Citron. This is Sexy in Your 60s. See you next Tuesday.